Say no again, and we'll lock you out. My son stood in my kitchen with his palm on my door like a bouncer, not a boy I once carried home asleep from the cinema. He said it without heat, like one more chore he'd assigned himself. Bins on Tuesday, threaten mother on Thursday. I watched the kettle click off and thought how quietly cruelty can land, the way dust settles. Everywhere, and somehow invisible until you breathe it in. Dan wants dinners. Hot food every evening, enough for us and the boys, he says, eyes moving around my shelves as if tallying my worth. Sierra waits in the hall with her sunglasses on her head, though we are indoors. She's holding a grocery list she did not write. When I don't answer, Dan continues, "You're alone, Mom. You like cooking. It makes sense." It does not make sense, but I am 76 and have learned that some nonsense is dressed in reasonable shoes. I don't raise my voice. I take out the blue pot George bought me the year he still believed gifts could fix time. I set it on the stove and ask what they want tonight. Dan blinks, surprised to be obeyed so easily. "Lasagna," he says, like a manager placing an order. "And make extra. We'll swing back at 7. He plants a spare key on the counter, the one I gave him for emergencies, and taps it twice with his finger. "Don't make us use this the hard way." They leave with the draft pulling at the doormat. The house settles. I pick up the key and feel its teeth like a small animal in my palm. My knees ache, rain coming, and I sit, because that is what an honest body demands. The quiet after a threat is not peace, it is the echo of someone else's certainty. I breathe it out, then stand and wash my hands to the wrists. I decide that I will cook. I will cook properly, with thyme bruised between my fingers and tomatoes roasted until they sigh. But not for them. At the market I walk slow, because you must when your hips click and your mind is sharp. I choose good ricotta, the kind that tastes of milk and morning. I choose basil that still believes in sun. The boy at the till calls me Miss Evelyn, like I'm someone who might still run for a bus. I pay in cash. Coins feel real when everything else keeps being promised and withdrawn. Back home, I grind pepper until the kitchen smells like a hillside. I salt the water like the sea, the way my neighbor Mr. Alvarez used to joke before his stroke took the left side of his smile. The oven warms. The house takes on that old Sunday smell of cheese and comfort. I think about keys. I think about doors. I think about how a son can grow up and forget the person who taught him to chew slowly, to swallow before he speaks. The first pan is for Mrs. Wilcox across the alley, whose pension doesn't stretch to fresh anything at the end of the month. I wrap it in foil and tie it with string, because presentation should not belong only to the rich. On the path, I pass the hydrangeas. I cut back too hard last autumn. They came back anyway. Plants do not make a fuss about survival. They simply return to work. Mrs. Wilcox opens at the second knock, lipstick neat, cardigan fastened wrong. "Is it Thursday?" she asks, embarrassed. "It's lasagna," I say, and she laughs the soft laugh of someone who has been remembered. She tries to pay me with a tin of peaches, and I tell her to keep them for a meaner day. She takes the pan like it's a certificate of worth. "You're a good girl, Evelyn," she says. I am no girl, but I nod and put another knot in the string inside my chest to keep my ribs together. On the way back, I stop at the duplex where the new couple lives, the one with the pram always folded by the stairs. The baby is sleeping on his father's chest, small hand splayed like a starfish. "We're managing," the father whispers, eyes red in the noble way men's eyes have been allowed to be only recently. "Manage better," I whisper back, and slide the pan onto their hall table. By 6:30, the last pan cools on my rack. My kitchen looks like a church after a bake sale. I wash the blue pot and set it to dry. The spare key is still on the counter, a little colon in a sentence that isn't finished. I put it in the drawer under the tea towels. Doors should open from love, not leverage. At 7, Dan texts, "We're here." I answer, "Come in, because I am not hiding." The front door opens without knocking. Sierra's perfume arrives before she does, slightly citrus, slightly sharp. They walk into a kitchen that smells like accomplishment, and I let them breathe it in before I tell the truth. "Where is it?" Dan asks, the way a man asks for what he has already spent. I gesture at the clean stove. "I cooked," I say, and my voice is steady because I've been practicing dignity since I was 12. "And I fed the neighborhood." Silence. Sierra's sunglasses are on again, though evening has taken the light. Dan's jaw moves. Grind, set, grind. "We said we'd lock you out," he reminds me, as if a second utterance makes a thing moral. I dry my hands on the towel and fold it into a square. "Then, you will be the kind of man who locks out his mother," I say. "When you are ready to be another kind, you may knock." He looks at me like a boy seeing the sea for the first time. More horizon than he can hold. He tries a different door. "You're doing this to hurt us." The old trick, turning a boundary into an injury. "No," I answer. "I'm doing this because I remember who I am." He reaches for the drawer where I keep the tea towels. The key is there. He finds it, holds it up by its ring so it dangles between us and makes a little bell of metal. I meet his eyes and do not blink. "Use it," I say, "and listen to what it says about you." The kettle clicks back to life because I forgot to turn it fully off. Steam slides up like a ghost changing its mind. Sierra shifts her weight. Somewhere in the hall, a floorboard answers. The evening birds finish their last argument in the maple outside. I take 2 cups from the shelf and set them down, because this is still my home, and I will not step backward in it. I ask whether they want tea. They don't answer. The door stays open to the street, and the night walks in. I woke up earlier than usual, the kind of morning when the silence feels heavier than the air. The smell of yesterday's cooking still lingered in the kitchen, though none of it had been for the people in this house. My son hadn't come home last night after our little exchange. That silence wasn't peace. It was an empty hallway where apologies should have been. I made tea, not the hurried cup I usually brewed before rushing to prepare their breakfast, but the kind I used to make for myself years ago. Strong, dark, with just a pinch of honey. I sat at the table and let the steam brush my face, the first small act of defiance no one else would notice. The knock on the door startled me. I half expected it to be Nathan, my grandson, with that sheepish grin of his, trying to smooth things over on his father's behalf. But it wasn't. It was Claire, my neighbor, and the one person on this street who still brought warmth without expecting anything in return. She held a small basket. "Figured you might like some fresh bread." "Still warm," she said, her eyes flicking toward the house as if she could see the tension through the walls. I invited her in, and we talked. Or rather, she talked, and I listened, because I didn't feel like explaining. But when she asked softly, "You all right?" I found myself telling her everything. The words came out slow at first, then faster, like water breaking through a dam. By the time I was done, the tea was cold, and she was shaking her head. "You've given them too much, Ruth. Too much without them ever having to earn it." Her words stayed with me long after she left. By afternoon, I'd made a decision. I went to the little drawer in my bedroom where I kept the important things: my bank book, the folder with receipts, the file marked house in my handwriting. I started sorting through the papers, each one a record of a time I'd stepped in, fixed something, paid for something. Repairs to the roof they never thanked me for. A car loan, school fees, grocery bills. So many little rescues, none of them returned. I called my bank. The young woman on the other end had that polite, distant tone that only wavered when I told her what I wanted. Cancel every automatic payment linked to my account. Every single one. And note that no one but me has authorization to make changes from now on. There was a pause. That will affect quite a few transactions, Mrs. Holloway. I'm counting on it, I said. When I hung up, the house was as quiet as before, but this time, the silence felt different. Not empty. Solid. Like a door closing firmly on my terms. By the next morning, the change had begun to ripple. I heard them in the kitchen before I was even out of bed. Hushed voices, then sharper ones. The clatter of a cupboard door. I didn't need to eavesdrop. I knew the sound of people discovering that the endless tap they'd been drinking from had gone dry. I took my time dressing. Soft cardigan, comfortable shoes, hair pinned neatly. Dignity doesn't shout. It arrives without haste. When I walked in, Dan stopped mid-sentence. Sierra, still in her robe, glanced at me over the rim of her coffee cup, eyes quick and calculating. "The bank called," Dan said, his voice tight, the kind of calm that could break into shouting any second. "Oh? Banks are chatty these days," I replied, pouring myself tea. "You canceled the payments for the groceries and the utility bill." "Yes," I said simply. "From now on, you'll handle your own expenses. You're grown, with jobs and a house. I think you'll manage." His jaw twitched. "We've been helping you too, you know. Keeping you here, making sure you're not alone." I put my cup down a little harder than necessary. "Don't dress it up, Daniel. You didn't keep me here out of kindness. You kept me here because I was useful." Sierra made a soft, derisive sound, but didn't speak. Her perfume, too sweet for morning, clung to the air like an unwelcome thought. I left them with their unfinished coffee and went out into the crisp air. The walk to the community center wasn't far, but the wind was sharp enough to make my eyes water. Inside, the kitchen was already busy. Folding tables lined with slow cookers, trays of rolls, stacks of paper plates. The Thursday lunch program for the seniors in our town had been running on fumes for months, and the organizer, Lorna, lit up when she saw the bags I'd brought. "More of your cooking?" "Bless you, Ruth," she said, already pulling out containers. "We never get enough fresh, proper food." I helped set up, ladling out thick soup to people who'd come in from the cold, handing over slices of bread still warm from the oven. They said thank you. They smiled. They looked at me like I was a person, not a resource. When I finally left, the sky was darkening. I walked home slowly, my fingers aching from the cold, but my mind steady. They might lock me out one day. They might stop speaking to me. But I'd found somewhere else to belong, and I wasn't going back to the way things were. I knew the storm was coming before the front door even shut. You can tell by the way someone's feet hit the floor. Dan's were heavy, quick, almost stomping. Sierra trailed behind him, her heels clicking like punctuation marks at the end of his thoughts. "Where have you been?" he demanded, shrugging off his coat, but not hanging it up. He left it sprawled on the back of a chair, the same way he left his accusations lying where they fell. Out, I said, setting my knitting aside. Helping at the community center. Helping strangers. Sierra cut in, arms crossed tight against her silk blouse. When you could be helping your own family. I looked at her. She wore that kind of lipstick that announces itself before she opens her mouth. My family, I said slowly, is capable of boiling pasta and turning on an oven. Dan stepped forward. That's not the point. You know what groceries cost? Gas? And now you've cut us off without warning. I've been warning you for years, I said, my voice steady. Every time you asked for more, every time you treated my pension like it was a shared account. You didn't hear me then. So now you're hearing me this way. His face flushed. I could see the boy in him, the one who used to sulk when I refused to buy him a toy at the market, convinced he'd been wronged by the world. We've been letting you stay here rent-free, he snapped. I laughed, not cruelly, but with the disbelief of someone who's just heard a fairy tale from the mouth of a man in a suit. Rent-free? I paid off the last of this mortgage. I replaced the boiler last winter. The roof repairs? My savings? The food in that fridge? My money. You've been letting me stay in the house I've kept standing. Sierra's gaze flicked toward Dan, searching for the next blow. He didn't have one ready, so she tried her own. It just feels ungrateful, she said softly, as if that would land more gently. Ungrateful, I repeated, tasting the word. You're right. I am ungrateful. I've been ungrateful for the privilege of being treated like a live-in maid who pays for the groceries. Silence. The kind that stretches, waiting to be filled with either apology or escalation. Dan chose escalation. If you can't contribute, you can't stay here. I stood, my knees protesting, but my back straight. If I can't contribute to your comfort, you mean? I contribute plenty elsewhere. And if you'd like me to go, say so like a man, not a landlord. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as though the words he'd prepared didn't sound as strong outside his head. I didn't wait for him to find them. I went to my room, closed the door, and began pulling down the old suitcase from the wardrobe. I didn't pack. Not yet. But I wanted him to hear the scrape of it on the floor. An hour later, there was a knock. Softer than before. Nathan's voice. Gran, can I come in? I opened the door. He looked uncertain, his hair a little mussed from running his hands through it. Dad's in a mood, he said unnecessarily. What happened? Your father and I disagree on definitions, I said. He smiled faintly. About what? About family, about respect, about whether love means control. He hesitated, then stepped inside. Gran, I know they take advantage. I see it. I can't say anything without making it worse. I put my hand on his arm. You don't have to fight my battles, Nathan, but you should remember what you've seen. When he left, I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time. The house felt smaller, the air closer. I thought about keys again, how they open, how they lock, how sometimes you have to hand one back, not because you're giving up, but because you've decided which doors are worth walking through. That night I cooked again, but only enough for myself and a plate for Mrs. Alvarez across the street. I didn't announce it. I just wrapped it, tied it with string, and left it on her step. The kitchen was quiet when I came back in. Dan and Sierra had gone out. For the first time in years, I sat down at my own table, ate my own dinner, and didn't wonder who else I should be feeding. The clock ticked, the tea steamed, and I realized I was already freer than I'd been in a long time. The change in their tactics was almost comical. Dan didn't stomp anymore. He drifted in and out of rooms as if he were just passing through, dropping little comments in my path like breadcrumbs. "You know, Gran," he began one morning. "He only calls me Gran when he wants something. This house is big for just one person. You might be more comfortable in a nice assisted living place. Meals, activities, people your age to talk to." I kept stirring my porridge. "Sounds lovely. Maybe you and Sierra should go. I hear they have bingo nights." He frowned, but before he could reply, Sierra breezed in, dressed as if she had somewhere important to be. She set a real estate flyer on the counter. "There's a unit opening up at Rosewood Court. Elevator access. No yard work. It would take a lot off your plate." I looked at the glossy photo. All beige walls and identical curtains. It smelled like loneliness, even from the picture. "And whose plate would it put more on?" I asked. "Yours?" Sierra didn't answer. Later that week, small inconveniences began cropping up. My laundry didn't get brought in from the line when the rain came. The kettle went missing for 2 days before reappearing on the highest shelf. Groceries I'd bought for my own use, tea, cheese, fresh herbs, mysteriously vanished. It wasn't enough to confront outright, but enough to say, "We can make you uncomfortable." I adapted. I bought a small electric kettle and kept it in my room. I labeled my food with a marker thick enough to be seen from across the fridge. I started locking my bedroom door when I went out. One afternoon, as I was returning from the community center with 2 empty casserole dishes in my bag, I saw Nathan sitting on the front steps. He looked restless, knees bouncing. "Gran, can I talk to you?" "Of course." I sat beside him, the late autumn sun low in the sky. "They're talking about selling the house," he said. "They think if they convince you to move out, they can get a good price and split it for a bigger place." I felt the familiar knot in my chest, but my voice stayed calm. "And did they tell you this because they wanted your blessing?" "No," he admitted. "I overheard. They don't know I know." I touched his hand. "Then keep it that way for now. Let them think they're the only ones making plans." That night, I opened the drawer where I kept the folder labeled House. Inside was the deed, in my name alone, and the will I'd updated after George died. My children's names were still there, but there were other options now. People and causes that had actually shown me kindness. The next morning, I made an appointment with a solicitor in town. The receptionist was brisk but polite, and when I explained what I needed, she nodded as though she'd heard it all before. "We can update your arrangements to reflect your wishes," she said. "You'll have control over everything." Control. Such a simple word, but after months, years of being managed, it tasted like a feast. When I got home, Sierra was in the kitchen, humming as she arranged flowers, expensive ones, the kind she'd claim were a gift, but I knew were bought with my grocery contributions. She glanced up. "Where have you been?" I smiled. "Taking care of my future." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not curiosity, but unease. She looked back at her flowers, snipping the stems too sharply. I went to my room, closed the door, and let myself breathe. The house wasn't theirs to sell. My life wasn't theirs to arrange. And if they wanted to play subtle games, they'd soon learn I had my own moves. It's funny how once you decide to change the ending of a story, the days start moving differently. Mine began to stretch open, less cramped by their demands, more filled with my own errands, my own choices. The solicitor called 2 days later. "Mrs. Holloway, your documents are ready for signing." Her voice was warm but businesslike, the kind of tone I'd heard from no one in my family for a long time. Respect in a sentence. I walked into her office that Thursday, wearing my navy coat and the scarf Claire had knitted me last winter. We went through each paper slowly. The will, the power of attorney, the deed arrangements. The changes were simple, but sharp, like pruning a rose bush. Some branches just had to go for the rest to bloom. When I left, the sky was low and gray, but I felt lighter. The decisions were mine now. Not a conversation, not a negotiation. Mine. On the way home, I stopped at the little bakery near the square and bought a basket of rolls and 2 apple pies. The young man at the counter grinned. "Big dinner tonight?" "Something like that," I said. At home, Dan was in the living room, pretending to watch the news. I could feel him tracking my movements as I carried the bags to the kitchen. Sierra was nowhere in sight, which meant she was probably on the phone. Her voice always sharper when she thought I couldn't hear. "I was thinking," Dan began, lowering the TV volume, "we should all have a family meeting, talk about the future." I set the rolls down on the counter. "The future? Yeah, you're not getting younger, Mom. We should have a plan." "I have one," I said, unwrapping the pies. "It's in writing." He blinked. "In writing?" "Yes, so there won't be any misunderstandings later." Something passed over his face. Curiosity, then suspicion. "What kind of writing?" "The legal kind," I said, and smiled just enough to make him uncomfortable. That evening, I brought one of the pies across the street to Mrs. Alvarez and kept the other for myself. I didn't offer any to Dan or Sierra. I didn't need to say why. The absence on their plates said enough. Later, as I was washing up, Nathan came in, smelling faintly of engine oil. "Gran, I heard Dad on the phone earlier. He's not happy. He thinks you've been talking to a lawyer." "I have," I said plainly. He gave a low whistle. "He's not going to like that." "I didn't expect him to," I said. "But my life isn't a popularity contest." He grinned at that, then grew serious. "If it gets bad, you can stay with me. I know my place is small, but—" I touched his cheek. "You're a good boy, Nathan. I hope you stay that way." When he left, I stood for a long while by the window, looking at the lights in the houses across the street. Each one held its own little battles, I was sure. Mine just happened to be coming to the surface. The next morning, Sierra tried a new tactic: sweetness. She brought me tea in bed, sat at the edge of the mattress like a daughter in a greeting card, and asked about my day. But when I mentioned I'd be out for a few hours, her smile thinned. "Out where?" "To see a friend." "Who?" she pressed. "Someone who doesn't ask so many questions," I said lightly, and got up to dress. Her perfume lingered after she left, but the sweetness in it had turned sour. The confrontation didn't come as a surprise. It was only a matter of when. It happened on a Sunday, the one day they both usually spent in a haze of late breakfasts and louder-than-necessary television. I'd been in the garden, trimming the last of the frost-bitten roses, when I heard Dan call my name. His tone had that hollow politeness people use when they're about to drop something heavy. I brushed the soil from my gloves before stepping inside. They were both in the dining room, an unusual choice, since they preferred to eat on the sofa. Sierra sat with her arms folded, chin lifted, while Dan paced at the head of the table. "We need to talk," he said, like a man about to fire an employee. "I gathered," I replied, setting my gloves on the windowsill. We heard from someone in town that you've been making legal arrangements about the house." His eyes were locked on mine, searching for the flinch that didn't come. "I have," I said simply. "It's my house. It's my right." "That's not how family works," Sierra cut in sharply. "That's exactly how property works," I countered. Dan stopped pacing. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look? People think we're taking advantage of me?" I finished for him. "Good. Let them think that. It happens to be true." His jaw worked, grinding down words that wouldn't come out clean. "We've supported you, Mom." "You've lived with me," I corrected. "Supported is something else entirely." Sierra leaned forward. "So what? You're just going to cut us out? Give everything to strangers?" "I'm giving it to people who've shown me respect," I said. "That may include some family. It may not." The air in the room thickened. Dan's voice dropped, low and cold. "If you think you can just change everything without us having a say—" "You don't get a say," I told him, calm as stone. "Not on this. Not anymore." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked into the kitchen. I could hear the fridge door slam. Sierra stayed seated, her eyes narrowing, but there was a flicker there. Doubt, maybe even fear. "You'll regret this," she said finally, standing. "I've regretted much worse," I answered. When they were both gone, I sat in the quiet and let my hands shake, just a little. Not from fear, but from the weight of speaking plainly after so many years of bending my voice to keep the peace. That evening, I baked. Not for them, for the neighbors, for the community center, for anyone who'd take a warm loaf with gratitude instead of entitlement. The smell filled the house, a reminder that my hands still worked, my choices still mattered. At dusk, I took 2 loaves across to Claire and stayed for tea. She didn't ask questions, just poured, and we sat listening to the wind push against the windows. By the time I walked home, the lights were off in the living room. I went straight to my room, locked the door, and slid the folder marked "House" under the bed. The papers were signed, sealed, witnessed. Whatever storm came next, the foundations were mine. It started with small sounds: a drawer opening, the rustle of papers, the faint click of metal. I was in the garden again, deadheading the last of the marigolds, when I realized those sounds were coming from my bedroom. I walked in quietly, the way you do when you're not sure whether to announce yourself or collect evidence first. Dan was standing at my dresser with his back to me. The folder marked "House" lay open, my documents spread like a fan of cards he thought he could win. "What are you doing?" My voice wasn't loud, but it landed heavy enough to make him flinch. "Looking for answers," he said, without turning around. "You're looking for something you have no right to." He picked up the spare house key from the dresser, turning it in his hand. "You think you can just lock us out of decisions? We live here too." "That key," I said evenly, "is for emergencies, not for rifling through my things." Finally, he turned, his eyes hard. "You've been sneaking around, changing wills, moving money. You think I wouldn't find out?" "I knew you would," I said. "I just didn't think you'd confirm my reasons so quickly." He stepped closer, holding the key up like a trophy. "If you're not careful, Mom, you'll find yourself locked out instead." "Then I'll be the kind of woman locked out by her own son," I said. "And you'll be the kind of man who does that." For a moment, neither of us moved. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Then Sierra's voice floated from the kitchen. Dan? Did you find it? He didn't answer her. He just tossed the key back onto the dresser, too hard, and walked past me, the heat of his anger trailing like smoke. When the front door closed behind them, I gathered the documents, slid them back into the folder, and took a long look at the key. I didn't put it back in the drawer. Instead, I slipped it into my coat pocket and walked straight to the locksmith on Main Street. The man there, white hair, hands like leather, didn't ask questions when I handed him the key. "Need a copy?" he asked. "No," I said. "I need a change." By that evening, the locks were new. My key worked. Theirs didn't. I half expected a storm when they came home, but there was only confusion. The rattle of the doorknob, a pause, then the sound of Dan's voice calling my name. I let them in. I didn't explain. The next morning, I delivered soup to Mrs. Alvarez and then spent the afternoon at the community center, helping Lorna plan the holiday meal. I felt lighter knowing that the most dangerous hands in my house no longer had free access. That night, Nathan came by quietly, slipping in after his parents had gone out. "Gran," he whispered, "what did you do? Dad's furious. He says you've gone too far." I smiled. "Nathan, I haven't even started." It began almost without my noticing. A few extra pies here, an extra pot of stew there. People started asking if I had any more of that bread or one of those apple tarts you made last month. I'd smile, wave it off, but the requests kept coming. One Thursday at the community center, Lorna pulled me aside. "Ruth, you should charge for some of these meals. People would pay. It wouldn't have to be much, just enough to cover your costs and give you something extra." I hesitated. "I'm not looking to start a business." "It doesn't have to be official," she said. "Just neighbors helping neighbors. And maybe helping you too." That night, I baked 4 loaves of bread and wrapped them neatly. I left 2 with Claire, who insisted on giving me a 10-pound note. The next day, Mrs. Alvarez brought over a bag of flour and a jar of honey, just to keep you baking. Word spread in that quiet way it does in small towns, the kind of gossip that's more kindness than malice. People began leaving little bundles on my doorstep, fresh eggs, a wedge of cheese, apples from someone's tree, and they always left with something warm in return. One Saturday, Nathan appeared with a cardboard box full of jars. "Figured you could use these for soups," he said. "Or you could sell jam if you wanted." I smiled. "You're full of ideas. It's just, you're good at this, Gran, and it makes you happy. I can see it." I didn't admit it out loud, but he was right. There was something deeply satisfying about feeding people who appreciated it. People who looked you in the eye and said thank you without a hint of expectation. By the end of the month, I had a small envelope tucked away in my wardrobe. A few bills from bread sales, coins from pies, the odd note pressed into my hand at the market. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Completely mine. Dan noticed, of course. He always notices when something doesn't involve him. One evening, as I was kneading dough, he leaned against the counter. "You've been busy," he said. "All this cooking for the neighborhood seems like a lot of effort." "It's good for me," I replied. "I bet it's good for them too," he said, watching me closely. "Any of them paying you?" "Some offer," I said, not meeting his eyes. "Maybe we should organize it properly. Make it a family thing." I looked up then. "No, Dan, it's not a family thing. It's mine." He smirked, but there was tension under it. Careful, Mom. People might start thinking you don't need us. I don't, I said, and returned to my dough. Later, when the bread came out of the oven, I set one loaf aside for myself and the others for the neighbors. I took my time walking each one over, enjoying the crisp night air. By the time I returned, the kitchen was empty, but I noticed the fridge had been opened and closed again. I checked the envelope in my wardrobe. Still there, still safe. For now. As I lay in bed, I thought about what Lorna had said. Neighbors helping neighbors. And I realized that this little thing I'd started wasn't just about food. It was about building something that couldn't be taken from me with a single turn of a key. It happened over dinner, or rather, their dinner. I'd made myself a small plate of pasta with olive oil and herbs, eaten early, and was enjoying a quiet cup of tea when Dan and Sierra came in from running errands. They smelled faintly of wine, the kind that comes from long lunches in places I'd never be invited to. Dan dropped into a chair, stretching like a man who'd earned something. "We've been talking," he began. "About your baking." Sierra set her handbag on the counter. "It's impressive what you've built. People love it. We think it could really take off." I kept my eyes on my tea. It's not meant to take off. It's meant to keep me busy and keep the neighbors fed. Dan leaned forward, elbows on the table. "But it's income, Mom, and income needs to be managed. Properly." I smiled, faint and steady. "It's already being managed." "By me?" Sierra gave a practiced laugh. "Sure, but you could be making more. If we handled the money, we could get bulk ingredients, maybe even a stall at the market. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." "That's the point," I said. "I like worrying about it. I like knowing exactly where it goes." Dan's jaw tightened. "You're keeping the money separate, aren't you?" "Yes. That's not fair." I set my cup down. "Dan, fairness would have been you letting me keep my own pension without using it for your bills. Fairness would have been not threatening to lock me out of the house I paid for. This is something I built myself with my own hands, and it's not up for discussion." For a moment, his expression was almost blank, the kind of blank that comes before someone decides whether to explode or walk away. Sierra filled the space with her voice. "It's just, we're family. We share things." "Then perhaps you could share the cost of utilities," I said, "or the grocery bill, or the last roof repair." She looked away, her lips pressed thin. Dan pushed back from the table so hard the chair legs scraped the floor. "You're making a mistake, Mom." "I've made plenty," I said. "This isn't one of them." They left the kitchen together, their voices low but sharp through the walls. I didn't try to catch the words. I'd heard the shape of them before. The planning, the deciding, the assuming. That night, I moved the envelope from my wardrobe to a locked tin I kept in the pantry. Then I took it one step further. I went to the bank and opened a small savings account in my own name, separate from everything they could see. When the teller asked if I wanted a card linked to it, I said no. "Just a passbook," I told her. Something solid. Something I could hold. Walking home, the air smelled of wood smoke and wet leaves. I thought about all the years I'd been told that family comes first, and how often that had meant I came last. By the time I turned onto our street, I'd made up my mind. Whatever I built now, whether it was bread or soup, or the simple act of saying no, would be mine entirely, and no one, not even my son, would get to call it theirs. The change came on a Thursday night. I'd just finished washing up from an afternoon of baking when I heard the front door slam. Not close, not firm. Slam. Dan came in first, his steps fast, shoulders set forward like a man walking into a fight he'd already decided to win. Sierra followed, not saying a word, her eyes narrowed in a way that made her look like she was assessing the cost of damage before it even happened. "We're done talking," Dan said. "No greeting, no lead-in." "Good," I replied, drying my hands. "Talking hasn't worked for us in a long time." He planted both palms on the table, leaning over it. "I'm not going to let you sabotage this family with your stubbornness. You've been moving money, changing papers." "I've been protecting what's mine," I said. Sierra stepped in then, her voice low but sharp. "Dan's right. You're acting like we're the enemy. We've been living together for years. We've helped each other." "You've helped yourselves," I cut in. Her lips thinned further. "If you keep this up, you're going to force our hand." "Force it," I said. Dan straightened, his expression darkening. "You think you're untouchable because of some pieces of paper you signed with a lawyer. But papers can be challenged, and people talk. It wouldn't be hard for word to get around that you're not capable of handling your affairs anymore." There it was, not even dressed up. "You'd tell people your own mother is incompetent?" I asked, my voice level. "If it meant protecting what's ours, yes," he said. I set the tea towel on the counter and looked him in the eye. "It's not yours, and you've just told me exactly how far you're willing to go." For a moment, the room was very quiet. Then Sierra said, "Dan, let's go." They left together, the door slamming again. I stood there for a long while, my hands resting on the counter. My pulse was steady. Years ago, that kind of threat would have left me shaking. Now, it only confirmed what I already knew. There was no compromise here, only a choice. Theirs or mine. The next morning, I went into town early. I stopped at the solicitor's again, explained what had been said, and asked about additional protections. She listened carefully, took notes, and then looked me square in the eye. "You've done the right thing getting ahead of this," she said. "If they try to challenge your capacity, there will be documentation of your decisions and your mental clarity. We'll make sure there's no room for doubt." When I left her office, the relief was quieter than I expected. It wasn't joy. It was the calm of having one more lock on a door someone was trying to break through. That afternoon, I baked as usual, but this time, I added a new habit. I kept a small notebook on the counter and wrote down every item I made, who it went to, and what was given in return. Not because I needed to keep track for myself, but because I knew one day I might need proof that I'd been running my own life just fine. By evening, Dan and Sierra still hadn't returned. Nathan came in instead, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. "They're staying at a friend's tonight," he said. "They're angry." "I know," I said. "They think you're being manipulated. By who, I don't know. They didn't say." I smiled at that. If they mean the solicitor, then yes, I'm being manipulated into protecting myself. He didn't laugh, but his eyes softened. "Gran, I don't know how this ends, but I'm on your side." "That's all I need to know," I said. After he left, I locked up for the night. Every door, every window. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd finally learned there's no shame in guarding what's yours. It was raining the next morning, the kind of cold, soaking rain that seeps into your sleeves no matter how you turn your umbrella. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, listening to the drops patter against the window. The house was quiet. Dan and Sierra still hadn't come back from wherever they'd spent the night. The stillness gave me space to think. For months, I'd been defending myself in pieces. A changed lock here, a canceled payment there, a folder hidden in a drawer. But their last threat had made it clear. As long as they believed they had a claim to my home, my money, my decisions, they would keep coming. Halfway through my second cup, I stood up, went to my room, and pulled the house folder from under the bed. The papers inside were already in my name, but I knew there was one more step that would seal things beyond their reach. I called my solicitor and asked a simple question. Can I remove someone from my will entirely? Her answer was crisp. Yes, and given your reasons, we can have it documented and witnessed before the week is out. By noon, I was in her office again, rainwater still clinging to my coat. We went through the changes line by line. Dan's name was struck through. Sierra's was never there to begin with. In their place, I named Nathan and a small list of friends, neighbors, and the community center. This way, she said, even if they tried to contest it, there's nothing for them to gain. I signed, initialed, and signed again. When it was done, she handed me the updated document in a sealed envelope. Keep it safe, she said. On the walk home, the rain eased into a fine mist. My shoes squelched, but my steps felt lighter than they had in months. When I came in, Dan was at the kitchen table, a half-empty mug of coffee in front of him. Sierra leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. Where have you been? Dan asked. Taking care of things, I said, hanging up my coat. What things? His voice sharpened. My affairs, I replied. The kind you've been so concerned about. He stared at me for a moment, then gave a short laugh. You think you can just cut us out, after everything? I don't think, I said, meeting his eyes. I know. Sierra straightened, her phone forgotten. That's cruel, Ruth. No, I said. Cruel is threatening to declare your mother incompetent to get her property. Cruel is using her pension to pay your bills and then telling her she's a burden. This, I tapped the envelope in my hand, is self-respect. Dan's face darkened, but he didn't speak. Sierra muttered something under her breath and left the room. I placed the envelope in the locked tin in the pantry, next to the passbook for my new account. Two simple objects, but together they meant freedom. That evening, Nathan came by. I told him what I'd done. He didn't say much, just hugged me, long and tight. You deserve better, Gran, he said. I know, I replied. That's why I'm making sure I get it. Later, as the rain started again, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights blur in the wet air. The house felt different. Not safer exactly, but steadier. Whatever storm they brought next, I was no longer bracing for it. I was ready to meet it head on. They didn't find out right away. For a few days, the house was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Dan was civil, Sierra polite in that brittle way that suggests she's keeping score. I knew it wouldn't last. The crack came on a Tuesday evening. I was making soup. Lentils, carrots, a bit of smoked paprika, when the front door opened and shut harder than necessary. Dan came into the kitchen with a folded piece of paper in his hand. His face was pale, except for 2 spots of high color on his cheeks. You went to the solicitor, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And you took me out of your will. I stirred the pot. Yes. The paper in his hand crumpled. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've insured my home, my money, and my decisions go to people who've treated me with respect, I said. Sierra appeared in the doorway, her arms folded. This is beyond petty, Ruth. This is vindictive. No, I replied, still calm. Vindictive would be leaving you in, letting you think you'd benefit, and then pulling it away at the last minute. This is honest. Dan stepped closer. You can't just erase me from your life like that. I didn't erase you from my life, I said, only from my assets. The two are not the same, though you seem to think they are. For a moment, his expression faltered, hurt, maybe even shame, but it hardened again. You're making a huge mistake. People will think you've lost it. They can think what they like, I said. The law will think otherwise. Sierra gave a little scoff. So this is how it ends? After everything you've done for us? I looked at her then. Really looked. I did it for you because I believed you'd have done the same for me. I was wrong. That's not a mistake I'll make again. They left together, muttering, the paper still clenched in Dan's hand. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in years. Not out of fear, exactly, but because I no longer felt I owed them unrestricted access to my space or my trust. The next day, Claire knocked with a small bundle of fresh rolls. She took one look at my face and said, "They know, don't they?" "They know," I confirmed. She nodded slowly. "Then you've crossed the hardest line. The rest is just holding it." I spent the afternoon at the community center, peeling potatoes and chatting with Lorna about the upcoming holiday meal. Every so often I caught myself smiling, not from joy exactly, but from the certainty that, for the first time in a long while, I was living by my own terms. When I came home, the house was empty. On the kitchen table sat a note in Sierra's neat handwriting. "We're staying with friends for a while. Think about what you've done." I folded it and put it in the bin. I didn't need to think. I'd already decided. The first morning after they left, the house felt unnaturally still. No footsteps overhead, no slammed cupboard doors, no perfume hanging in the hallway like a question I didn't want to answer. I made tea, buttered a roll Claire had brought the night before, and sat in the kitchen listening to the rain tap the roof. It was the kind of peace you don't notice until it's been gone a long time. The day moved at my pace. I baked bread without anyone asking if there was extra. I read a book without feeling guilty that I wasn't folding someone else's laundry. I walked to the market, bought what I liked, and didn't hear a single complaint about wasting money on luxuries when I put cheese in my basket. At the community center, Lorna teased me about my lighter step. "You look like someone who's just paid off a debt." "In a way, I have," I said. Word had gotten around that Dan and Sierra were taking space. People drew their own conclusions. Some offered sympathy, others offered help, and a few, the ones who'd seen enough of life to understand, simply nodded as if I'd joined a club you don't talk about but recognize instantly. By the end of the week, I'd filled a small basket with coins and notes from selling bread and pies. I opened the tin in the pantry, counted the money, and felt the quiet thrill of knowing every bit of it was mine. Not ours. Mine. Nathan came by on Saturday afternoon, carrying a bag of groceries. "I figured you might be low on a few things," he said, setting them on the counter. "I'm fine," I told him. "But thank you." He leaned against the counter, looking around. "It's strange without them here." "Strange," I agreed, "but not unpleasant." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think they'll come back?" I buttered 2 slices of bread, handed him one. "If they do, it will have to be on different terms." We ate in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't weigh on you. That evening, I pulled out the knitting I'd abandoned months ago. My hands remembered the rhythm. and the soft click of the needles filled the room. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, but I was warm. Over the next few days, I settled into something that felt almost like a new life. Mornings in the garden, afternoons at the center, evenings reading or baking. I was still aware of them. They existed in the periphery, like a storm on the far horizon. But they no longer filled the house, no longer dictated my hours or my thoughts. Claire came over one afternoon with a pot of soup. "You should have someone here for Christmas," she said. "I will," I promised. "Just not the ones you're thinking of." By the time December rolled in, the kitchen shelves were lined with jars of preserves, and the freezer was full of pies for the holiday lunch at the center. My hands were busy, my days full, and my nights quiet. One frosty morning, I opened the front door to find a small envelope on the mat. Inside was a folded note in Dan's handwriting. "We need to talk." I put it on the hall table and left it there. That afternoon, I took a loaf of bread to Mrs. Alvarez and stayed for tea. She talked about her grandchildren, about the cat she'd adopted, about nothing and everything. It was the kind of conversation that made time slow down. When I came home, the note was still on the table. I didn't open it again. Some things don't need to be answered right away. Some things don't need to be answered at all. That night, I went to bed early. The house silent except for the steady tick of the clock. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a door to slam or a voice to rise. I wasn't waiting for anything. I already had what I wanted. Christmas morning came with pale sunlight on frost-tipped grass. I woke early, out of habit more than excitement, and made tea while the house still felt wrapped in its own stillness. No voices drifting from the hallway, no footsteps on the stairs, just the creak of the kettle and the faint hum of the old radiator. I baked 2 loaves of bread and a batch of small mince pies, packing them neatly into baskets lined with cloth. By mid-morning, I was at the community center, the air warm with the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon. Lorna was already bustling between tables, her cheeks flushed from the kitchen heat. "Ruth, you're a lifesaver," she said, taking the baskets from me. The day moved in a haze of laughter, clinking cups, and the murmur of conversations. I served plates, poured tea, and sat now and then to eat with neighbors who had become something more. My people, my circle. When someone asked if my family would be joining, I smiled. In a way, they already have. By late afternoon, my feet ached, but it was the good kind of tired. I walked home through streets strung with fairy lights, each window glowing against the dark. When I reached my own front door, I paused. For years, this threshold had felt like something to cross carefully, bracing for whatever mood waited inside. Now, it was simply my door, my home. Inside, the house was warm and quiet. On the hall table, Dan's note still sat where I'd left it weeks ago. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and set it back down without opening it. That evening, I lit a single candle on the kitchen table and made myself a simple supper: bread, cheese, and the last slice of apple pie. I ate slowly, tasting every bite. There was no rush. No one to demand seconds or complain about the meal. Just me, and the kind of peace I'd once thought was for other people. After the washing up, I sat by the window with my knitting. Outside, the frost was settling again, silvering the lawn. I thought about the months behind me, the arguments, the threats, the quiet steps toward reclaiming what had been mine all along. It hadn't been a loud victory. There was no grand speech, no final door slammed in triumph. But as I looked around the room, I knew I had won. My home was my own. My choices were my own. And the people who remained in my life were there because they wanted to be, not because they needed what I could give them. The clock ticked softly. Somewhere down the street, someone was laughing. I picked up my needles again, the yarn sliding easily through my fingers. I thought of something my mother once told me when I was a girl. Quiet strength lasts longer than noise. I hadn't understood it then. I did now. When I finally went to bed, the house settled around me like an old friend. I slept without dreams, without worry, and without waiting for the sound of someone else's key in the lock. In the morning, I would bake again, not because I had to, not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to. And that, more than anything, was the real victory.